"Hello," the voice called. It was a woman. "Are you all looking for Carousel?" I looked down toward the road. 3 people stood there expectantly. I had to blink a few times. The lights from the animatronics display had left bright impressions on my eyes. The person talking was a slender woman with black hair. She might have been in her late 20s. 2 men accompanied her. One was a tall twig of a guy who wore a jester's grin around the same age. The other guy was older, 45 or so, and he did not look nearly as entertained to be there. He wore a gruff beard and tamed his slightly overgrown hair with a ball cap. He said nothing, but slowly smoked away at the cigar in his mouth. And one spoke first. He cleared his throat. "We're here to visit my brother. Carousel is just down this road, right?" "It sure is," the tall skinny man said. The woman said, "My name is Valerie. These are Todd and Arthur." She gestured toward the tall man and then the gruff man respectively. "We're here to guide newcomers to town and help you get all set up. Things are a little diff." She was cut off by the taller man. "Todd. Is your brother Christian Stone?" he asked with a bemused smile. His 2 companions seemed taken aback by his question. They looked intently at Ant 1. "Yes," Ant 1 said. "Do you know him?" Valerie, Arthur, and Todd looked at each other. "Yeah, we know him," Valerie said, not missing a beat. "Have known him for years now." "That would make you Ant 1. "That's me," Ant 1 said. "We're supposed to be heading to Lake Dyer." "He has a lake house over there," Ant 1 said. "Is that down this way?" Todd started to laugh. "He invited you out to the lake house?" he asked. "Sounds like you have a fun time ahead of you." "We'll take you to him," Valerie said cheerfully. "Are all of you here to visit Chris? There's a centennial event. We're expecting guests to start coming in soon. The 2 of us are going to the horror convention in town," Bobby said, putting his arm around his wife. "Is that this way too?" "Yes," Valerie said softly. "You must be Bobby Gill?" "That's me," Bobby said. She turned to my friends and me. "We have to give the guests a little tour as we go before we can take you to Chris. Do you mind just following along?" And one took a moment to consider what he was being asked and said, "Sure." "Were we supposed to take these?" He held up the 3 tickets he had gotten from Silas the mechanical showman. "Those are for participating in the events," Todd said, "if you decide you want to do that. We have some really cool stuff this year. I'm sure Chris told you all about it. There's a trivia contest at a bar, right?" Ant-Man asked. "Scary movie trivia." "There is," Todd said. "But you're not going to win if there's anything I can do about it. As a matter of fact, the movie trivia contest is why I was invited. They needed a ringer." "Great," Valerie said. "If we can get the guests of the convention to come to the front, please." Bobby Gill and his wife Janet shuffled forward hauling their luggage. The woman in the brown jacket stayed behind with the rest of us, never saying a word, carrying her meager luggage. "Kind of a strange time to be visiting the place, right?" Camden whispered to me as we grabbed our luggage and began following the 3 guides. I nodded. "What kind of place is Carousel?" Anna asked Ant 1 as we took to the road. "Dude, I have no idea," he answered. He must have been as confused as we were. Apparently, his brother didn't tell him about the welcome committee. Anna moved closer to me and Camden and asked me, "What are you doing after graduation?" "Traveling the world," I said as we marched down the road. "I'll move from place to place, staying one step ahead of my student loan provider." Anna laughed. "I've considered that," she said. "I think they'd find me." "Realistically, grad school," I said. "I don't know what I would study, but at least it would put off the real world for a few years." "They should put that on their brochures," Camden said. "What about you two?" I asked. I looked at Camden. "You still going the medical school route?" "No," Camden said. "I'm sticking with engineering. The allure of acquiring knowledge has faded. I just want to graduate and make enough money to take care of my family, then I'm retiring early." "No surfing, doctor?" I asked. It had been a joke when we were kids. Camden said he wanted to open a medical practice near a beach. "Surfing engineer," he said. The hours are better. Camden and I managed to pick up where we left off. Lame jokes were like a secret handshake for us when we were kids. I was happy to see we were still in lockstep. What did you decide on? I asked Anna. Antoine says he's going to make me the Secretary of the Interior when he wins the presidency, so I have that job lined up, she said. I think I'll do some volunteer work until then. I laughed. He made a good choice. As we walked, my curiosity turned back to those strange tickets we had been supplied so generously by the creepy animatronic figure. I took mine from my pocket and examined them. My friends may not have been too interested in whatever role-playing game the town at Carousel was putting on, but it looked interesting to me. Was Carousel a fancy LARP colony or something? What did you get? I asked Camden, showing him my tickets. He showed me his. He had a silver ticket. The Scholar. Major archetype. You are the Scholar. You were always the smartest, cleverest, and most knowledgeable. Let's put it all to the test. When danger lurks at your door, will you be able to outthink evil, plan for success, or solve the mystery? Study up. This will be the hardest test you have ever taken. Base stats. Medal, for feats of strength and offensive ability. 1. Moxie, to make your performance convincing. 2. Hustle, to be quick, nimble, evasive, and to always hit your mark. 2. Savvy, for perception, planning, and deduction. 5. Grit, for willpower, toughness, and endurance. 1. Plot armor, conquering all 5 aspects of plot armor will make you a master of horror. 11. Total of all stats. His stats were almost the same as mine. He had also received a green ticket. Right tool for the job. Type, buff. Archetype, scholar. Aspect, .. Stat used, savvy. Every monster has its weakness. The scholar must work to find it. When formulating a plan that incorporates the enemy's mortal weakness, receive a bonus to savvy. When fighting an enemy and attacking it with its mortal weakness, receive a bonus to metal. Werewolf, meet silver bullet. His third and final ticket was blue. Eureka. Type, insight. Archetype, scholar. Aspect, researcher. Stat used, savvy. In the movies, a character is often able to find the one line of text in a book that will help them solve the mystery or defeat the monster. It never takes more than a few moments of looking. When this ticket is equipped, the player will be given guidance on the red wallpaper to assist in searching through volumes of text for needed information. You will be drawn to it quickly. This drop may help you find the information you need, but it's up to you to figure out how to use it. What the heck are these things? I asked under my breath as I handed the tickets back to him. What had the ticket meant when it said the player would receive guidance on the red wallpaper? That would probably be explained to people who were actually playing the game, I figured. I found myself letting the issue go. Fitting archetype, Camden said, pointing to my film buff ticket. Yours too, scholar, I said. I wanted to take a look at everyone else's tickets, but before I could even begin to ask, the 3 guides had stopped in the road and turned to look at us. We have to wait here for a few minutes. There is something that newcomers need to see, Valerie said in a slow, calm manner. The way a zookeeper speaks to a lion. There was something strange going on. I couldn't put my finger on it. Even stranger, I felt myself overcome with a warm, fuzzy feeling. I wasn't worried a bit. On the left side of the road at the place we had stopped was a wrought iron fence. The gate further down the road had a sign on it. The top part of the sign was broken off. All that remained was the slogan, "The Jewel of Carousel." The gate was padlocked, and the entire fence was covered in those decorative spikes that can often be seen on fences surrounding expensive homes. It was a step up from barbed wire, at least. I can't wait, Bubby said. I knew this was supposed to be a fancy convention, but I have a feeling this is going to be great. He looked at his wife and squeezed her tight. I have a good feeling about this, honey. It was like he was trying to will her into enjoying herself. His wife didn't look so enthused. She looked worried. The guides continued looking at their watches. I checked my phone, but the time was way off. It said it was 5 in the afternoon, but the encroaching darkness told me it was much later in the evening. Almost sunset. Whatever time they were waiting for must have come because they suddenly stopped looking at their watches. You need to listen to us with what is about to happen. It is vitally important to do what we say, Valerie said. There was that calm, zookeeper tone again. Her eyes were scanning through the wrought iron fence. I couldn't see much on the other side, what with the overgrown grass and thickets. Todd, the tall guide, wasn't looking at the fence. He was watching us, watching our reactions. The third guide, Arthur, hadn't said a thing. His eyes were on the tip of his cigar as if nothing about this situation interested him in the least. I heard something coming in the distance. Footsteps. Heavy breathing. Whimpering. A woman burst through a thicket right next to us and ran directly into the fence at full speed. She was young, around my age, with dark skin, long, curly, flowing hair, and a look of absolute terror in her eyes. Kimberly and Janet screamed. The woman hit the fence with such force that a wound opened up on her forehead. Blood began gushing down her face. "Help!" she screamed as she saw us. "Please! Please!" She shook the fence, but it held solid. Valerie spoke loudly and calmly to us. "Don't do anything," she said. "Don't even speak to her." We were freaking out. Antoine was cursing repeatedly. Kimberly was pulling at his arm, looking for some reassurance. Yet, no one did anything. We were frightened, but we were also subdued. It was like we were watching a movie and not real life. We weren't reacting like normal. "Help me!" the woman screamed again. She looked directly in my eyes, pleading with me. "Please. They are coming." I started to point toward the gate down the road, but Valerie must have seen the thought forming in my mind and reached forward and grabbed my arm. "Do not speak to her," she said. "Look at her. Focus on her. Do you see something strange?" Of course I see something strange, I thought. There is a terrified woman bleeding all over the place. I still did what Valerie commanded. Sure enough, I caught a glimpse of something I had never seen before. It was the first time I saw the red wallpaper. I couldn't make out what was on it, but it was the first makings of a movie poster. I saw the word NPC too, but I didn't believe it. I felt sick to my stomach. Yelling could be heard behind the woman. Men were chasing her down. I heard the baying of a hound. "Please," she said. "They have another guy in the basement. Please help us." No one said or did anything. Everyone had a terrified look on their faces. Everyone except the three guides, whose expressions were something closer to shame or, perhaps, resignation. Then the woman began attempting to squeeze through the bars. She was too big. The bars were too tight and their barbs too sharp. They stuck into her like fishhooks, but still she pushed desperately for freedom. "All right, let's go," Arthur said, speaking for the first time. "You don't want to see the next part." I believed him. He turned to leave. Everyone followed him at a quick pace as we left the woman. Samantha. Her name was Samantha. I wasn't sure how I knew that, but I did. We passed by the gate and were soon beyond the property altogether. The last thing we heard of her was a scream that echoed from far behind us. I refused to even think about it. "What kind of place is this?" Janet demanded. She was in between tears and fury. "Honey," her husband said, "it's just part of the show. It's for the convention." God, I hoped he was right, but the three guides ignored the question. After they had gotten us away from the bleeding woman, we came to a section of the road dominated by farmland. There was corn as far as the eye could see. Valerie coughed to get everyone's attention. "We're sorry you had to see that," she said. "But we hope that by showing you that, it might make the next part easier." She looked back at Arthur. He nodded to her, encouraging her to continue. "Carousel is not what you think. There is no horror convention. Your brother Chris did not invite you. It was all a trick." "What the hell are you talking about?" Antoine said. "I spoke to Chris." "You said you knew him." Valerie looked genuinely sad when he asked that. Arthur took over. How long has it been since you've physically seen your brother? Antoine hesitated to answer. Years, right? Arthur continued. What was it, 8 or 9 years? He looked back at Todd. 8 years, Todd said. Valerie nodded. Antoine didn't answer for a moment. I've been FaceTiming him, he said. I don't know what that is, but I can tell you it was not your brother you were talking to, Arthur said. What are you talking about? Antoine said defiantly. Let me guess. Your brother disappeared one day. Probably left a note or a phone message, so the police weren't called. You haven't seen him since then, not until he called you out of the blue years later? Antoine didn't respond. Arthur's guess was on the money. He asked you about your life and your friends. Of those two things, he always seemed more interested in your friends. Wanted to know a lot of specific details. Got to know their names, their personalities, their hobbies? Antoine's eyes widened. And when he finally invited you to come out to his lake house, Todd chuckled. He told you which of your friends he wanted you to bring along. Not your buddies on the basketball team. He wanted you to bring your smartest friend, he gestured toward Camden, and your prettiest lady friend, he pointed at Kimberly. He even must have asked if you knew anyone who was obsessed with scary movies, didn't he? He pointed at me. How did he know? He said bring these specific friends and come out to my place, right? Antoine didn't answer. Kimberly implored him, Antoine, is he right? Antoine nodded. It wasn't like that though. Chris was just... You weren't speaking to Chris, Arthur said. Chris has been trapped here with us the whole time. If I'm not mistaken, he came here with Val and Todd, right? Todd nodded. You weren't talking to Chris. You were talking to Carousel. And now that it's got you here, it'll never let you leave. As I was trying to deal with the revelation that Arthur had laid on us, I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Janet rushing back toward the parking lot, her husband in tow. He was trying to get her to stay, but she wasn't having it. Wow, Todd said. Normally it takes a bit longer to convince people we're telling the truth. I see this as a win. I thought you were keeping them calm, Arthur said sharply to Valerie. I tried. I am, Valerie said. She must have gotten a high roll. A high roll? Like in a role-playing game? If that meant what I thought it meant, then Valerie was somehow keeping us from panicking and running away like Janet had. A thought entered my mind, should we be running? No worries, you all, Valerie said. Everything will be fine. There she went with that zookeeper's voice. And it worked. The spark of panic that had risen in me was extinguished. I felt like everything would be all right. We just needed to get to the bottom of things. Go get the strays, Arthur said to Todd. Todd nodded and followed behind them, his gesturous grin never fading. As we waited, Arthur and Valerie spoke to each other in hushed tones. I thought I heard them call Janet a hysteric. A little extreme. Heck, I had half a mind to follow behind and hitch a ride out of here. I didn't expect to see them come back. Janet looked determined to be rid of this whole mess. After I heard some tires screeching in the distance, I figured they had hightailed it, but 10 minutes later they reappeared on the road. Janet looked terrified. Bobby looked puzzled. Todd was laughing up a storm. The exit is gone, Bobby said in a low tone. The road we came on was just gone. This convention is something else. He was still clinging to the theory that all of this was part of some elaborate interactive horror convention. In a small way, so was I. As the couple slowly made their way back to the group, Arthur continued to explain the malevolent entity known as Carousel. You have to be careful around town, he said. There are 1,000 different ways to get killed here, and some of them are really hard to see coming. Valerie took over. Carousel is a terrifying place, but it operates under predictable rules. One of those rules is that when you get here, you have to complete a storyline. She pointed back toward the wrought iron fence where we had seen the terrified woman. That woman is named Samantha. She is a non-player character for a storyline called Permanent Vacancy. It's a medium-level storyline, so we didn't want you to interact with her, or else you might get stuck in the story. The fact remains, you do have to complete a storyline soon. Carousel is going to keep trying to push you into one. So, we picked one out for you, one that we think we can help you complete without much trouble. The three guides waved us farther down the road. And we followed, shell-shocked and numb. As we walked, we passed by a patchwork of crops. "This is the wrong time of year for this stuff," Camden whispered to me and Anna as we walked. Antoine and Kimberly walked farther behind us. I looked around. He was right. Corn, wheat, pumpkins, and sunflowers. Those are not something you would see at the beginning of summer. Those were fall crops. The crops weren't the only thing that was wrong. The weather was too cool. Even the sun in the sky didn't look right for summer. I was working full-time trying to rationalize everything I was seeing. This wasn't helping. Could this be real? I thought about what we had been told about storylines. I pulled out my tickets. My plot armor was 11, but it would be reduced by half when I entered a storyline. In a movie, plot armor is a term that is used to explain away improbable plot points. The masked killer takes out the ex-marine like he's made of cardboard, but the high school cheerleader manages to fight him off. That's plot armor. One character dies from getting tapped in the head. Another survives 3 explosions and 4 stabbings. Plot armor. The bad guy is unkillable by a minor character, but the protagonist manages to get the better of them with ease. 2 words. Plot armor. I don't know how it functioned in Carousel, but if it meant what it sounded like, and all of this was actually real, it could only mean one thing, that I was screwed. We walked for so long that we started to see buildings. Eventually, we came upon a large gate that read Patcher's Family Farm. I was almost shocked to see that, unlike the rest of Carousel that we had seen so far, this place had people. In fact, it had kids running around screaming and having fun. Patcher's Family Farm was an agritourism destination. You know, one of those places with hayrides, pumpkin chunking, and farm-themed carnival games. None of the people on the farm paid us any mind. I got a very strange feeling from them. This is where my visions of the red wallpaper really started to flare up. I saw words that I couldn't quite read, but I knew something was unusual about them. I suspected that, like the bloody woman Samantha, these people were NPCs. They also wore an aggressive amount of denim. I don't know which of those things made me more uncomfortable. We were led to the back of the farm where there were no NPCs. A huge display of pumpkins was set up on hay bales. Next to them was a booth that read Corn Maze $5. A sign on the booth said open. As I was reading, the words "The Final Straw 2" flashed into my mind. "Where's the attendant?" Janet asked. She had woken up from her fearful hibernation. She was right. It was clear that there was supposed to be an attendant here. There was a chair behind the booth that had been knocked over, and the cash box was sitting open and untouched where anyone could just take from it. I looked around, but we were alone. "You have a good eye. Hysterics are very good at this part," Valerie said. "It is quite strange that the attendant is missing and the chair is knocked over, and yet the cash box is right here, open. Try to look at this booth and really focus on it. What do you see?" I did as she instructed. Truth be told, I didn't see anything but red wallpaper, but it's true, something was screaming out to me from within my mind. There was something there to see, but I couldn't quite make it out. What was my mind trying to tell me? Suddenly, I got a flash, an image that appeared to be one of those old-fashioned elevator indicators you might see in a fancy hotel, with a needle that would point to what floor the elevator was on while you were waiting. But the indicator in my mind didn't have floor numbers. Instead, it had words. And while I couldn't read all of those words, I could read one, omen. "It takes a while to be able to see things clearly," Valerie said. "But this is an omen. It's an ominous sign that something is about to happen. This is a storyline called The Final Straw 2, and you know it's a storyline because it is an omen right here, a sign of bad things to come. Sometimes omens are subtle, like an attendant being missing mysteriously. Other times they're obvious, like a bleeding woman running up to you asking for help. But whenever you see an omen, The next thing you have to look out for is the choice. Todd took over. In this case, the choice is pretty simple. You either enter the maze or leave. You also have the option of investigating the farmhouse over there, he said, pointing around the side of the corn maze. But we want you to ignore that for now. Now Arthur spoke up. The corn maze is simple. Get to the end. That's it. That's the entire storyline as far as you're concerned. The three of us will take care of the actual plot. All you have to do is walk from the entrance of the corn maze to the exit. That's it. It's virtually impossible to get killed permanently in a storyline like this. I thought it was strange that he said, get killed permanently. Does that suggest that you could be killed temporarily? Anna thought it was strange too. What do you mean killed permanently? She asked. Arthur took a deep breath. As long as one person survives to the end of the story, you'll all come out without a scratch on you. Simple. I want you to look at this sign, he said, pointing to the sign above the booth. There is a simple rule on it. You see that? He asked. Painted in red paint, the booth said, enter one at a time, do not cut through the corn. Carousel operates by rules. You see a rule, you follow it. So stick to the paths. We always tell people that, and we always get ignored. Don't be the person that ignores us this time. They started to wave us through one at a time. I positioned myself so that I could go in last. After everyone else had walked or run into the corn maze, I walked in. The word choice appeared in my head. I ignored it. After entering the maze and taking a few turns, I was well and truly lost. So much so that even when I turned around and tried to find the entrance I had just come through, I couldn't find it. I tried thinking back to the picture of the maze that I had seen at the booth, trying to remember its turns and twists. It didn't look this complicated, but it was useless. I won't lie. I was thoroughly spooked. Whatever calming effect Valerie was able to cast over us disappeared the instant I entered the maze. I stuck to the middle of the path was as best I could and didn't take a turn unless I was certain that it was an actual path and not just a place where the corn had been planted thinly. If the rule says don't cut through the corn, then I'm not going to cut through the corn. As I walked forward, I heard footsteps all around me, but try as I might, I couldn't see anyone else. I caught a glimpse of something orange and decided to go check it out. Whatever it might be, it was better than being lost in a sea of corn. It took me 5 minutes to wind my way around until eventually I stumbled back on the orange thing I had seen. It was a pumpkin display, a smaller version of what had been on the outside of the corn maze. Nothing more than 6 hay bales and a dozen or so pumpkins of various sizes. Some of them had even been carved into faces like a jack-o'-lantern. The red wallpaper overtook my vision. This was the first clear image it had given me. I saw a movie poster of this exact scene, but it was different. In the painting, the pumpkins were all smashed. The poster's title was simply territorial. As much as I desired to look away, I had to keep reading further. Beneath the poster was a brass plate, like those that might be beneath a painting at a museum. It read, "Territorial. This killer will punish those who harm its domain." As strange as it is, I knew exactly what it was talking about. Sometimes in horror movies, characters that destroy a monster's domain are killed off instantly. This usually happens in the first few scenes. Cut down a sacred tree, build on an Indian burial ground, or even smash a pumpkin, and you're dead. I grabbed the tickets in my pocket. I flipped to the one that said Trap Master. This was my ability. I could see the rules the monsters played by. That's what this was. If some punk kid were to come along to this display and mess with it, the monster of the storyline would appear and punish them. I considered screaming out to my friends that they shouldn't destroy the pumpkin displays. That was my job as the film buff, right? As I was considering this, I heard a twig snap behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin as I turned and saw the woman in the brown leather jacket. I saw a movie poster in my head. A woman walks through an alley where an axe murderer waits behind a dumpster. Dinah Kano is the outsider. Dinah? I asked. This vision was really throwing evidence onto the pile that I wasn't the target of the most elaborate prank ever. She nodded slowly with a shade of distrust. "You run into any trouble?" she asked. That was the first time I had heard her speak. "No," I said. "I am freaked out though." Are you seeing stuff in your head?" "A red wall," she said. She was taking it better than I was. "I'm seeing words," I said. "They are telling me that this display is linked to whatever monster is here. If someone harms it, they get punished." "Film buff," she said. She must have been able to see the movie posters in her head too. "Do you think they drugged us?" I asked. "To make us think that we were seeing things? To scare us?" I really wanted her to say that she knew it was fake. Maybe she could explain what was going on. I prefer my horror stories on the silver screen. She paused for a moment and then grew a diabolical grin on her face. She walked closer to me, near the pumpkin display, looked me in the eye, and said, "There's only one way to find out." She reached out and grabbed one of the pumpkins. After a moment's contemplation, she lifted it over her head and slammed it back down to the ground, shattering it. "My friends and I are going to die here, but I'll die more times than them, I think." This trip was supposed to be a chance for me to turn over a new leaf. My first real road trip after 3 years in college. The car ride here seemed normal enough at first. I was in the back with the luggage on one of those tiny extra seats that large SUVs sometimes have. There was no legroom, but I couldn't complain. I never got invited to things like this. I was happy to tag along. They could have strapped me to the roof for all I cared. And one sat quietly in the driver's seat, his shoulders tense, his eyes hyper-focused on the road. He was usually talkative, always ready to provide his opinion on any given topic, but as we neared our destination, he had gone silent. I hadn't known him for very long, but I could still tell he was uncharacteristically nervous. In the front passenger seat, his girlfriend Kimberly reached a hand over to him and gently grasped the crook of his elbow. "Everything will be okay," she said softly. "We're here for you. You know that, right?" Most guys in our graduating class had a crush on Kimberly. She had long blonde hair and natural poise. And one shrugged his broad shoulders and nodded his head. "I know," he said with practiced confidence. "I'm just excited. That's all. That's to be expected." Kimberly ran her hand up his bicep and onto his shoulder affectionately. Antoine looked worried to me, but none of us really knew what Antoine was feeling. How could we? 8 years earlier, his older brother Christian had decided to start over. He left behind his family, his college education, and an all-but guaranteed career in professional football after graduation. No one knew why he had done it, and what sparse communication he had made with his family afterward had left more questions than it had answers. My first thought was that Chris had joined a cult, but even I knew not to suggest that to Antoine. Chris had gotten back in touch with Antoine a few months earlier. Antoine said it was like answering a phone call from a ghost. 8 years with no contact, and then suddenly he was FaceTiming with his brother every night. That phone call was what led to the road trip. We were on our way out to Chris's lake house in some exclusive resort town in the Ozark Mountains. When I was invited on the trip, I took the chance to look up Christian Stone. When he took off, he was being talked about on SportsCenter and in blogs on college football. From the sound of it, the guy would have been a millionaire if he had kept it. He had huge prospects. I couldn't imagine why he had left it all behind. Then again, if he had a lake house, he couldn't have been doing too poorly. The radio went out about 20 minutes before we got to our destination. Antoine flicked the scan button on the steering wheel to try to find a station. The radio searched and searched for a broadcast but only found one. It's run 41.1 Carousel Public Radio. We've had a beautiful day here in Carousel. The city council has begun setting up for the centennial celebration, so stay away from Town Square unless you like traffic. Our correspondent, Jeffrey Tethers, is at Lake Dyer with the fishing report, and we have Coach Boom in the studio to talk about Friday night's game. All after this commercial. Antoine clicked the radio off. "I'm going to pass them on the next straight away," he said. He had been growing frustrated at the small car in front of us. They were creeping along the road at a measly 30 miles an hour. We had been behind them for 20 minutes, but with the winding, heavily forested roads, there was no safe place to get around them. "Just be patient," Anna said from the back seat. "We can't be too far off." As she spoke, a green VW van approached us from behind. It had to slow down considerably upon reaching us. Its horn began honking almost immediately. "Great, now we have a car behind us," Antoine said. As if to change the subject, Kimberly interjected, "I have no signal. Does anyone have a signal?" She raised her phone up toward the sunroof to no avail. I checked my phone. I had no signal either. I had one new message. Camden, my oldest friend, had just sent a picture of a sign advertising a bed and breakfast that had the phrase "closed for renovations." He had taken the picture some miles back when we stopped for gas. I chuckled at the typo. We must have lost signal right after that. It had been a long time since I had been a part of a group chat with Camden. Not since sophomore year in high school. Camden and I had been best friends in middle school, but not as much afterward. He had somehow managed to thread the needle of being smart and popular. I barely managed to accomplish the first part. At some point in time, the geeks and the nerds go their separate ways. There was no animosity between us. It was just hard talking about the good old days when the good old days were from before you finished puberty. We had grown up so much since then. I spent my time watching scary movies and puttering about online between classes. He spent his time with competitive internships and scholastic competitions. Honestly, when I got the invite to the lake house, I was surprised. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. As we crept around another corner, the VW van gunned its engine and quickly passed by Antoine's SUV and the little car in front of us. That must have emboldened Antoine because he followed suit and left the slow car in the dust. 10 minutes later, after zooming around tight, forested corners, the small backwoods road gave way to a large parking lot. It was so big I thought we must have been near an airport or a sports arena. There was no airport though. No football stadium either, nothing to justify the huge empty lot. There were maybe a few dozen vehicles scattered about, but they were few and far between. What's more, there were no people anywhere. It was completely abandoned. Except for us and the VW van, which had been parked in the shade. The driver, a dark-haired woman in her mid-30s, carried a large, overstuffed backpack along with a sports duffel. She wore a brown leather jacket and distressed blue jeans. Antoine parked next to her van in the shade. "Carousel," I read aloud off of a large sign at the front of the parking lot. "Yeah," Antoine said as he opened the back of his SUV. "Paradise, USA." There was only one road leading from the parking lot to Carousel, and it had been blocked off. It had those removable metal poles that you might see on a college campus designed to keep cars from driving down the wrong street. They were locked into place with padlocks. We would have to go the rest of the way on foot. When we were invited, Antoine's brother Chris had warned us of this. It was because of the centennial celebration Carousel was having. No traffic allowed in. It made enough sense to me. It didn't matter. We were there to bask in the sun at his brother's lake house. We would stay out of town for the most part. I had the least luggage of anyone in the group, just one duffel. As they were retrieving their things from the car, I went ahead toward the road leading to Carousel. The path was decorated on both sides with advertisements for the centennial celebration. Apparently, this was a big deal for the town. The woman in the brown leather jacket had slowed her pace and was taking in her surroundings. We weren't in town yet. There were no street signs here, no people. Just off the road was a single wooden building that had little signage except for a door that read "Employees Only." It also had a covered porch on the front and what looked to be a town map hanging against the side of the building. I debated whether I should try to speak to the woman. She didn't look like she wanted to talk to me or anyone else. She was all business. The way that she scanned the building led me to believe that she hadn't been here before either. I turned and waited for my friends to catch up. Antoine and Kimberly quickly joined me, but Anna and Camden were lagging behind, staring at the cars in the parking lot. I walked down to them to see what they were so interested in. "These cars have been here a long time," Camden said. "The tires have dry rotted." He was right. Every vehicle in the parking lot but ours had flat tires. Their windshields were covered in dust. Their paint jobs were faded. I didn't know what to think of it. "That's strange, right?" I asked. "Yep," Camden said. "Maybe this is long-term parking, and the other cars were moved for the centennial. That makes sense, I guess." "Look," Anna said, "we're here to support Antoine. Worst-case scenario, we'll just get the hell out of Dodge. Don't go acting weird. He has enough to worry about." Just as we turned to walk up the road, the little compact car that we had passed on the way here finally pulled into the huge parking lot. We watched as it slowly drove its way to the front of the lot and parked beside Antoine's SUV. Two people exited the vehicle along with luggage. They were arguing. Well, the woman was arguing. The man was just kind of taking it. I just don't understand why they would hold an event all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. Don't they know it's more sensible to hold it in a bigger city? The woman spoke with a waver and a voice like a mouse whose tail had been stepped on. I wouldn't say they became part of our group, but they definitely started moving with us as if they thought we were all supposed to be grouped together. "You all here for the convention?" the man said. "Name's Bobby Gill." He held out his hand. I extended mine for a handshake. "Riley Lawrence," I said. "They don't need to know your name," the woman said to Bobby Gill. "This place gives me the creeps. Let's just go." "It's just polite, Janet," Bobby Gill said. He looked over at us expectantly. "So how about this convention, huh?" "I can hardly think I'm so excited." Camden responded, "We're not here for that. We're just going to the lake." "Ah," Bobby said. "Carousel is holding a horror convention, you may know. Carousel Horror Nights. They have for nearly 3 decades. He could barely contain his excitement. "I've been asked to be a guest speaker. I moderate one of the top horror boards on the internet. Arterial Oasis. If you've heard of that." I had heard of it. I didn't say so because his wife Janet looked annoyed at my presence. I got an easy out when we heard a loud bang up ahead. We moved closer to investigate. "Were you trying to break it off its hinges?" Camden asked. The door that read employees only was now open. "I just knocked on it," Antoine said. "I heard someone in there." "I don't see anyone," Anna said. The woman who drove the van was peeking her head in as Antoine and Kimberly watched. The inside of the building was dark. Little light managed to seep in and even the open door didn't illuminate the shadows within. I couldn't imagine anyone was in there. My heart started to beat quickly though. I couldn't say why. Then music started to play. It was old-fashioned carnival music that came out too slow, like it was coming from an old wind-up music player in need of a tune-up. Next were the lights. Yellow-white light bulbs illuminated the inside of the room. The lights weren't hanging from the ceiling. No, they were all affixed to a machine that was about the size of an ATM. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I saw what the machine was, one of those old animatronic fortune tellers. The kind that might be seen at carnivals or on boardwalks. Every circus has at least one, and they could even be found in an arcade. Normally, the animatronics would give you a rolled-up fortune in exchange for a quarter. It might even be programmed to tell your future out loud. Often, they were dressed like psychics or traveling palm readers. This one was different. The base was a red square box, and above that, a glass box contained the upper torso of a smiling figure. He was dressed like an old-fashioned usher that you might see at a movie theater. He wore a red jacket with brass buttons and a round usher's cap with a chin strap, and in his hand, he held a flashlight that flicked on and off along with all the other light bulbs attached to the machine. Across the top of the machine was a sign that read Carousel's own Silas the Mechanical Showman. In the middle of the machine, right below the glass case, was a red button with a receptacle underneath. For a moment, no one in the group said anything as the fortune-telling machine began whirring to life. I think Antoine might have cursed under his breath, and Kimberly gasped. Beside me, the woman, Janet, was pulling on her husband's arm. After the carnival tune ended, the dummy in the glass case began to speak. His little wooden mouth moved up and down with a slight clack of yellow teeth. "Welcome to Carousel, the town where movies come to life. The show's about to start, and you're in the front row," he said in a slightly warped mechanical voice. "What the heck?" I said. "Come on up and get your tickets. The centennial celebration awaits." No one moved. "Are we supposed to get a ticket?" Anna asked, looking at Antoine. After all, he was the one who invited us. "I have no idea. Chris didn't say anything about this," he responded. As if to answer the question, Silas the mechanical showman said, "No admittance without a ticket. You don't want to miss the show." Antoine shrugged his shoulders and approached the machine. He pushed the red button and the gears inside the mechanism turned, releasing 3 large tickets into the receptacle underneath. Antoine retrieved them and began to read through them. He didn't say anything as he read, but a puzzled look appeared on his face. Before I could ask what the ticket said, Kimberly had also pushed the red button and retrieved her tickets. Then the woman in the brown jacket, followed by Anna and Camden. The couple who had arrived in the small car each pressed the button after each other, though the woman absolutely did not want to, from the look on her face. Finally, it was my turn. I pressed the button, and 3 tickets slid out. As I picked them up, I noted how heavy they were, how thick. They were printed on high-quality stock, and each was cool to the touch. Each of the tickets had a title, an illustration, an elaborate graphic design, and a text description. "These are awesome," Bubby said. "They really go all out with this convention." I don't know what I had expected to be on the tickets, but I certainly didn't expect what I ended up seeing. One of my tickets was blue, another green, and the one that interested me the most at first, for whatever reason, was silver. Still, no one said anything as we each reviewed our tickets. My silver ticket read, "The Film Buff. Minor Archetype. You're the film buff. The master of the unwritten rules of horror movies. You've seen every slasher, spine-tingler, and creature feature. Now we will see if you can survive them in real life. With your help, your allies may stand a chance against the nightmarish beings that lurk in the shadows of the silver screen. That is, if you can get them to listen to you before it's too late." Base stats. Metal, for feats of strength and offensive ability. 1. Moxie, to make your performance convincing. 3. Hustle, to be quick, nimble, evasive, and to always hit your mark. 1. Savvy, for perception, planning, and deduction. 5. Grit, for willpower, toughness, and endurance. 1. Plot armor, conquering all 5 aspects of plot armor will make you a master of horror. 11. Total of all stats. Was this some strange role-playing event? Were my friends and I even supposed to get tickets? My curiosity was piqued. I read further. My green ticket read, Cinemaseer. Type, buff. Archetype, film buff. Aspect, --. Stat used, savvy. The film buff has seen every horror movie and can guess every twist and turn. When the film buff makes a clever prediction about an important and impactful plot event, all allies who hear it will obtain a boost in grit and savvy if that prediction is proven true. Beware, the more predictions the player makes, the less powerful they will become. Predictions must be made on screen. Multiple buffs in a single storyline are difficult to perform at the lower levels. You may not want someone calling out a plot twist in your theater, but you would kill to have someone do it in Carousel. On screen? What could that mean? The blue ticket read, Trop Master. Type, Insight. Archetype, Film Buff. Aspect, --. Stat used, Savvy. The signature ability of the film buff is their ability to understand how monsters and slashers operate within a story. With this ticket, the film buff will have insight into which tropes enemies have equipped. This trope works best with high savvy and close proximity to the enemy. Enemy tropes have generic descriptions. The clever player will figure out how their tropes will be expressed in each specific storyline. With great power comes great balancing. During storylines where this trope is equipped, the film buff's plot armor will be reduced by half. Hopefully, that's all that will be cut in half. The curtains were up. The show was starting. The game at Carousel had begun. Hello reader. Books 1 through 3 of the game at Carousel have been moved to Ku and Audible. In a town where horror movie tropes come to life, one's only chance to survive is to play their role in the first book of a spine-tingling Gamlet series. When horror-obsessed Riley Lawrence and his group of college friends arrive in the small town of Carousel for their centennial celebration, the few decrepit cars parked in the street don't scare them. But when they enter a locked building, an animatronic usher hands them each a ticket, and the lights dim, Riley realizes they've entered the inescapable patchwork of a horror movie set. And they've each been assigned an archetype: scholar, athlete, eye candy, final girl, to play out as the curtains rise. Assigned the film buff archetype, Riley's doomed to repeat a pattern, knowing exactly who the killer is but never surviving the attacks himself. After all, film buffs may know what's coming, but they're always the first to be hunted down. Until that is, Riley learns he can avoid a death or two by exploiting the oblivious bystander trope. It seems monsters and killers won't harm him as long as he can convincingly pretend he hasn't noticed them. To make it through this deadly game, Riley and his friends will need to leverage their tropes effectively to determine what's trapping them there in the first place. But as the rounds continue and escape seems farther and farther out of reach, they'll be forced to ask themselves, would they survive in a horror movie? It was time. Brent's time to shine. For 30 seconds, he was going to step in and be the hero. It wouldn't look like it. His new trope set him up to save the day in the most gruesome way. It was a self-sacrifice trope, one of the most powerful kinds of tropes in the game. Curiosity killed the neighbor - a wallflower trope designed to attract all attention from the enemy in the camera and give his allies the perfect chance to escape, regroup, or go on the offensive. All he had to do was walk out of his comfortable hideout, ask, "What the hell is all this ruckus?" And then those little goblin creatures would leave Adeline alone and come attack him. They would kill him instantly, usually in a painful way. He wouldn't even be a named character in the storyline. His allies would get a boost in hustle. They would be set up for an easy win. He would be in ribbons. Dead. Adeline stood in the street at the end of the cul-de-sac attempting to kick the little demons off her. Now was the time. Just one quick act of bravery and she would be safe. Brent would be dead. But why should he? Adeline hadn't died once. Not a single time. She was a final girl in every way. Wasn't it her turn? Why should he have to die again? He didn't want to. He stood behind a bush near the street. He could help her so easily. His death would be quick. They'd yank his head off or cut him in half, something sudden and terrifying for the audience. He knew the drill. He just couldn't do it. They didn't need her alive to win anyway. He watched through the bush as she was attacked. He was sorry. Kind of. He backed away. He wasn't going to die this time. He refused. Hey, Silas, Miles, the team's comedian, said as he pressed down the button to obtain his rewards. I'd like a tall brunette who'll laugh at my jokes and hold me in her arms all night long. Silas the mechanical showman waved his flashlight and out of his dispenser shot a series of tickets, as well as a few coins. Sorry, I don't take requests, Silas said in his showman voice. You're thinking of my cousin, the jukebox. Miles threw back his head and gave a throaty laugh. Then, he turned toward his teammates and said, Hey, guys, did you hear what Silas just said? Silas just said his cousin's a... He stopped short as he realized that his team was preoccupied by a rather loud discussion between William and Brent. William was a blue-blooded college man with well-defined musculature who held himself like a young senator. I knew you've been holding out on us, William said firmly. Now, I can prove it. You could have saved Adeline. Everything was set up just like Arthur and I planned, but you didn't go through with it. Bullshit, Brent said. He stood defiantly against the larger man and refused to give an inch. I can't be everywhere every minute of the day. I didn't know she was in danger. You said something similar last time, William said, trying and failing to keep an even temper. But last time, I didn't have my war games drop. This time, I saw you right next to Adeline. You could have saved her from those things. Not like we needed the drop to know that you have been avoiding your job. You think we haven't noticed how you're lagging behind in levels? It's because you were not doing anything in storylines, and Carousel knows it. Arthur held his arm out. William, this is pointless. He knows what he's doing. We're not going to get him to stop by yelling at him. Let's just go back to base and tell Curtis. In the background, Adeline silently wept. Brent stammered something indecipherable and then said, "This is so fucking stupid. Why does she automatically get to live? I've died plenty. Why should I have to sacrifice myself? You ask me, it was good for her." Finally getting the raw side of the deal. William's eyes grew wide. "It's your job. We were relying on you. Arthur makes the plans because he's the scholar. Adeline plays her role as final girl. Miles dicks around because he's the comedian. Jenny is our eye candy. And I make sure everything runs smoothly because I'm the soldier." "Soldier?" Brent said. "You were in the ROTC. You ran around campus playing dress-up. You are not a soldier." "When I found her," William said, trying to hold back his rage, "she was eaten to hell. I'm sorry, Adeline, I have to tell him. They took her face, her teeth, her fingers, eyes. They did everything but kill her because they couldn't kill her. Do you know why?" Brent didn't answer. He grew enraged with every word William said. "Because she is the last one alive," William continued. "She can't die until the rest of us do. If you had used your sacrifice trop, your death would have been almost instant. You were an extra. Hers took hours, you son of a bitch. That's my sister you did this to. I'm never doing a run with you again." William walked by Brent toward Silas the showman. "So, it's true?" Arthur asked Brent. "You've just been, what, goofing off this whole time? Did you get yourself written off last year at the parade? Is that why you were nowhere to be found when we needed you?" "I knew it." Brent didn't answer. Arthur took that as a yes and followed behind William. Jenny gently guided Adeline over toward Silas. "I shouldn't have to die. It's not fair," Brent said so quietly that no one could hear him. Once they had all gotten their tickets and were heading back to base, Brent ran up to Silas, slapped his button, and waited for Silas to dispense his rewards. It was true. Brent had been leveling much slower than the rest of his team. It wasn't that he didn't care or didn't want to help. He just couldn't bring himself to die on purpose. He had died enough since arriving. Now that he had collected some wallflower tropes that could keep him alive, he intended to stay that way. "Those guys are assholes," he said to Silas. "Fuck him." Silas took a little longer than usual to give up Brent's winnings. Brent didn't get much. He never did. Almost no money. No stat tickets. It had been a month or more since he got one of those. He did get one thing, though. Something he had never dreamed of acquiring. "Writ of habitation?" he read aloud as he looked down at the folded piece of paper Silas had given him. "Nobody's gotten one of these in ages." The City of Carousel. Writ of habitation. By the decrees of the City of Carousel and under the authority of the Office of the Mayor, this document certifies that, bearer, Brent Henderson, henceforth has the right and authority to claim as a base of operations, the dwelling, structure, or property described as follows. The property known as the Guest House, located at 616 Nowlinger Road, is a detached single-story residential dwelling constructed primarily of reinforced concrete and steel bars, encompassing an approximate total square footage of 1,200 square feet situated approximately 100 feet to the northeast of the main residence. This structure boasts 3 main rooms, which include features such as a bedroom devoid of windows, a bathroom with a securely locked utility closet, a kitchen equipped with a solid steel door, and a living area fortified with shatterproof windows. Under the provisions of this writ, the following conditions apply: protection from omens, The property and its immediate vicinity are free from the activation of any omen, ensuring the bearer's safety from unforeseen threats emanating from said omens. Duration of habitation: this writ grants the bearer habitation rights for a period of 5 years. Guarantee of livable lodgings: the property is insured to provide basic amenities including a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, a functional locking door, and weatherproofing sufficient for standard habitation, though not necessarily of premium quality. Provision of sustenance: drinkable water and sustenance will be provided, though quantity may vary and is not guaranteed to be of the highest standard. Guarantee of safe acquisition: upon signing this writ, the bearer is assured protection and will remain unharmed in their good faith efforts to take actual possession of the designated property. Transferability: this writ is non-transferable. Any attempt to sell, trade, share, or give away the rights to the claimed property will result in immediate nullification of this document and all protections herein. Maintenance of sanctuary: the bearer is not responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the property. Such repairs and upkeep will be administered by the city. Covenant of quiet enjoyment: the bearer will not be required to perform in any storyline while inhabiting the property. Respective boundaries: the protections offered by this writ are bound to the described property only. Straying outside its confines forfeits the guarantees granted herein. Limitations: this writ of habitation is valid for one tenant only. If additional tenants are found on the property, this writ is null and void. Act of God's clause: the office of the mayor and the city of Carousel shall not be held liable for any damages or threats arising due to unforeseeable acts of nature or apocalyptic occurrences beyond the city's apparent control. Renewal and extension: upon expiry, the bearer has the first right to renew this writ. Renewal terms and conditions will be dictated by the city of Carousel's then current rules. Sealed with the emblem of the office of the mayor. Date of issue: January 12, 2004. That place is a fortress, he thought as he read the description. And I won't have to do any storylines while I'm there. He didn't get a chance to read the whole writ because he had to catch up with his team. His former team, perhaps. If William wasn't willing to do runs with him, he was likely on his own. The Geist estate was once the grandest property in all of Carousel proper. Bartholomew Geist had built the mansion that rested within its gates. His son Carlisle had built upon it and expanded it to its current size. His granddaughter Therese had built the sanatorium on the far side of the property to care for the mentally infirm as a charitable effort. It had once been beautiful. By the time Brent had come to live there, it had all gone downhill. The sanatorium had closed down after some bad press, or so the lore told. The mansion itself had half burned to the ground. The west wing was ash. The main house was rotted, and the labyrinthine dungeons had been flooded by rain. The east wing, though, that was dry and habitable. They squeezed nearly 100 people into it at times, the smallest wing. The population fluctuated as some players would go find their own bases from time to time. They all came back eventually. Or they died. Brent bunked in a room with 22 other men. It had a working fireplace and bathroom. That was a plus. Brent lay in his bunk listening as rumors of his cowardice spread around the estate. People didn't go easy on cowards. Even the hysterics would give him the cold shoulder, and being cowards was their whole thing. This place was unbearable. He had nearly drifted to sleep when someone approached his bunk. It was Curtis, the bossman. Brent threw on his best semblance of remorse and turned to face the man. "I don't need to tell you that what you did was wrong, do I?" Curtis asked. Brent shook his head. "A quick death is easy to get over, all things considered," Curtis continued. "A long, drawn-out one can leave scars that take years to fade. Adeline's in pretty bad shape. Even with my psychiatrist tropes." "I'm sorry," Brent lied. "I was just scared." Curtis didn't seem to buy it. "You're being assigned a new team. We don't know who yet, but whoever it is will want some concessions." "Concessions?" Brent asked. "To make sure that you can't just wander off instead of helping," he said. "We put a lot of trust in wallflowers and outsiders to not just run away. They've got the tropes for it. Never thought I'd actually find someone who would be willing to do it, though. It takes trust to succeed here in Carousel. Brent was silent for a moment. He lay in his bed and contemplated his next words. Is that what this is? He asked, moving his arm around the crowded room. Success. If this is succeeding, I can't imagine failing. As if to emphasize his point, a ghastly howl sounded from somewhere down in the flooded dungeons. Ghouls are riled up from the storm. We've got it handled, Curtis said. You may not like our lodgings here, but you have no idea how much worse it can get. Maybe, Brent said. All right, Curtis said. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Maybe we can get something worked out? Brent lay on his back staring up at the ceiling. He grabbed the writ he had just won from his pocket. The writ was valid for one tenant only. It sounded like it would be a good break from all of this. Dead things wading through flood waters below. Ash-covered wraiths floating from place to place, victims of the fire long ago. Haunted paintings. Escaped mental patients of yesteryear. This place was a nightmare. Sure, the players were careful and there hadn't been casualties yet, but it was only a matter of time. He couldn't stay here any longer. He tucked the writ back in his pocket. He had made up his mind. He was moving. Maybe once he was gone, they might care how they had treated him. The writ guaranteed his safety as he traveled to claim the property. Even then, the journey from the Geist estate to his new base was terrifying. He had gotten Amelia to help him map out the safest route. She really liked planning things out. It was in her meticulous nature. By the time she was done, he had a detailed and thorough plan of passage, so even if the writ's protection failed, he would have options of where to lay low and how to get back. As he packed his bags, he waited for one of his former teammates to come and ask where he was going. They could see him packing, prepping, and getting ready to head out. None of them stopped him or asked questions. Adeline watched him but didn't say anything as he left. It turned out that all of Amelia's planning was for naught, as the writ's protection got the job done just fine. The guest house was in the newer, nicer part of town. The house in question was on a small acreage abutting the golf course. Quite the upgrade. Brent smirked as he approached the home at 616 Nowlinger. He was nervous about knocking on the door. In Carousel, that was a non-starter. You just didn't do it. You risked awakening a serial killer or something. Luckily, as Brent approached, his new landlord and landlady were out front toiling in the garden. They noticed him as he walked up. Are you our new tenant? The woman, Martha Montresor, called to him as he arrived. She was a kind-looking, bubbly woman with a short stature and rose-red cheeks. She reminded him of Mrs. Claus. Her husband, Reverend Ned Montresor, was not quite Santa Claus. He was lean, stern, and fit for his age as if he were a veteran. They were low-level NPCs. Their home was nice, and the weather was perfect. I sure am, Brent said. Wonderful, Martha said cheerfully. My husband will show you around. I have to go check on lunch. Brent smiled. He had heard stories of when Curtis and the others had arrived at the Geist estate after receiving the writ of habitation for the mansion. They inherited it from a distant relative. That was the story at least. The story here was different. Brent was a tenant. Simple. Straightforward. No omens. No drowned dead things howling in the basement. No teammates to pressure him. Reverend Montresor showed him around the property. He was told not to go into the main house. He was warned that sometimes golf balls get hit in the yard. In fact, he would learn that firsthand. Mr. Montresor showed him around the guest house with little enthusiasm. The place had everything. A bed, television, fully stocked kitchen, and bathroom. Everything he needed to just relax. You guys have a dog? He asked, pointing to the doggy flap on the front door. Reverend Montresor looked at where he was pointing. Nope, he said. The tour continued. As he was being shown through the living room, a loud thud sounded behind him. He jumped. Motherfucker! He screamed in shock. He turned to see the window on the opposite wall. It was unaffected. He could see a golf ball rolling away in the yard. The writ had said the windows were shatterproof. Now he knew why. "Now, we don't tolerate language like that here, son," Reverend Montresor said sternly. "Oh. Sorry. I'll try to remember," Brent said. The Reverend didn't respond. He just gave Brent a stern look and left. Brent double and triple checked that there were no omens to be found around the guest house. Sure enough, there were none. He didn't have any proper scouting tropes, so he had to walk around, looking at every object and waiting to see if the needle on the plot cycle moved up to omen. It never did. He was safe. He was free. Mrs. Montresor dropped off some cookies an hour or so later. They were delicious. He jumped back onto his new bed and, before he knew it, he was asleep. It had been a long time since he had slept that well. Tilde. He was awoken in the morning by a knock on his door. He looked at the alarm clock. It was 5:30 a.m. He didn't want to get up. The knocking continued. Eventually, he gave in. He dragged himself to the front door. As he went to open it, he realized, to his horror, that he couldn't. He struggled to try to turn the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Hello?" he asked in shock. "Down here, dear," Mrs. Montresor said gently. The doggy door opened a bit. Brent was hesitant to take anything from them. "Take it, son," the Reverend said on the other side. "Why is the door locked?" Brent demanded. "This will explain everything," the Reverend said. He looked down as someone on the other side slipped a large book through the doggy door. It was red in color and ornately designed. He caught a glimpse of the hand that was holding it. Something flashed on the red wallpaper. A sudden realization dawned on him. He moved to the window beside the door and opened the curtain. 12 people were standing outside, including the Montresors. They were all labeled adherent, on the red wallpaper. Enemies. They hit 10 levels on him. They must have had a drop to hide their true nature until now. "This isn't possible," he screamed. There weren't supposed to be any omens. He was certain he hadn't seen any omens, let alone triggered them. Here he was, though, trapped. He ran around the house. There were no exits. The windows, as advertised, were shatterproof. He had imagined it a perfect fortress. Unfortunately, the qualities that make a perfect fortress also make a perfect prison. Someone had come in the night and cleared out his food. The television was gone. How had he slept so hard he couldn't hear it? The cookies. He ran back to the door. "I'd really like to go now," he screamed. "We have to cleanse you, dear," Mrs. Montresor said sweetly. "You'll thank us later." "Shit," he said aloud after pacing back and forth for some time. "Fuck. That kind of language is not appropriate," the Reverend said with a terrifying ferocity. The stalemate lasted all day. "If you want food," Mrs. Montresor said, "you just have to show us your earnest desire for repentance. Read from the book. The Great Spirit will guide you." Brent bent down and picked up the red book. It was like a Bible from a nightmare world. The passages were insane, unlike anything he had ever read before. "Just let me go," he begged. But they didn't. Not that night. Not any night after. Days passed. Then weeks, months. Brent sat by the door. When he heard someone show up outside, he would recite from the book for his daily bread. "Yea, in the shadow of night's deepest despair, when brimstone doth rain like molten tears and fires of judgment burn hotter than the very pits of hell." He paused. He wanted to protest, to yell angrily, but that would just make them punish him. "Let thy heart be rent asunder in repentance, that thy soul may find refuge in the righteous embrace of the Great Spirit. For in the unyielding grasp of yearning and sacrifice, redemption shall bloom like a lone rose in the midst of an eternal, desolate grave." The figure on the other side of the door didn't speak for a moment. Then, they asked, "Why did you pause?" They didn't wait for an answer. They walked away, taking his food with them. Brent wept. Tilde. "What is that?" Miles asked. William held the object up so that the others could examine it. "It's Brent's driver's license. He must have left it on accident." "Whoa," Jenny said. "That takes me back. What's it been?" 2 years. "Nearly 3, William answered. "Do you think he's still out there?" Adeline asked. "I mean, he never got posted. Do you think he found a way out?" The others didn't seem very optimistic about that. "Amelia and Curtis say that sometimes people just disappear," Arthur said. "What happens to them?" Adeline asked. "How should I know?" Arthur asked. "Wherever he is, I'm sure he's at peace. Did you guys hear about the new base?" "Not yet," William said. "I hear it's pretty nice." "I grabbed the writ from Curtis," Arthur said, pulling the paper out of his pocket. "Check it out. The City of Carousel. Writ of habitation. By the decrees of the City of Carousel and under the authority of the Office of the Mayor, this document certifies that, bearer, Amelia Trenton, is granted the right and authority to claim the expansive estate known as Dyer's Lodge located within the premises of Camp Dyer eastern shoreline of Dyer's Lake. Under the provisions of this writ, the following conditions apply. Extensive boundaries. The bearer is granted dominion over Dyer's Lodge and the surrounding lands within Camp Dyer, extending to the entirety of the eastern shoreline of Dyer's Lake. Protection from omens. Dyer's Lodge, Camp Dyer, and its immediate vicinity are safeguarded from the activation of any omen by accident, ensuring the bearer's safety and those within their domain from unforeseen malevolence. Guarantee against encumbrances and hostility. The described property shall remain free from lairs, nests, or havens of any adversarial entities. All hostile presences nearby will immediately vacate the vicinity and abstain from combative behavior. Amenity assurance. Dyer's Lodge is equipped with essential amenities, suitable for habitation and guest reception. This includes drinkable water and basic sustenance, though the luxury level of these provisions may vary. Duration of habitation. This writ grants the bearer and their heirs habitation rights for an indefinite period, ensuring long-term security and ownership. Transferability. Ownership of Dyer's Lodge is automatically extendable to the chosen heirs of the bearer. This writ remains active and non-expiring until an event of the original bearer's choosing. Maintenance and enhancement. While Dyer's Lodge is provided in a state ready for habitation, the bearer has the full right to further enhance, renovate, or expand the structure and surrounding areas as they see fit. Act of God Clause. The office of the mayor and the City of Carousel shall not be held liable for any damages or threats arising due to unforeseeable acts of nature or occurrences beyond the city's apparent control. Renewal and extension. While the duration is indefinite, any future terms and conditions, if they arise, will be dictated by the City of Carousel's then current rules, with the bearer given priority consideration. Violations. Breach of any conditions mentioned herein may result in discussions and negotiations rather than immediate revocation. Sealed with the emblem of the Office of the Mayor. Date of issue, December 15, 2006. "You see that," Arthur said. "Guarantee against encumbrances and hostility. You know what that means?" He didn't wait for an answer. "No howling ghouls," he said. "No haunted paintings. No fiery ghosts waking us up in the night every winter." "Huh," William said. "Didn't even know you could get these things where they guaranteed there would be no enemy lairs on the property. Always thought you had to scout the place out yourself. Make sure you won't get attacked." "Might do that anyway," Arthur said. "Can you imagine trying to live in a place without checking for enemies first?"